Let me say good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the monthly meetup that I have. We have begun to alternate 1 month in person and the next month virtual. So this is virtual month. Not sure we're going to do this in August. If we skip August, the next meetup will be in September, and I hope it will be live. We had a great turnout last time, and I'm eagerly looking forward to doing it in person again. The difference is that it's easier for some folks to participate virtually. And on the other hand, I read questions that have been submitted and I give answers with no feedback. And it's kind of just me as a monologue for the next hour, whereas it's much more conversational when we do it in person. But then maybe don't get as many questions in. Let me check with Lindsay, who's here with me, to tell people how they can submit questions. I have some that were already given, but of course, I'm interested in whatever questions folks have as long as time permits. Lindsay, how can people submit their questions?
They can send their messages via social media
Send via social media
or in live chats on Facebook and YouTube.
or in the live chats on Facebook and YouTube. And the social media address, like for Twitter,
Is Chairman Mendelson.
Chairman Mendelson.
On Facebook, it's Chairman Phil Mendelson,
On Facebook, it's Chairman Phil Mendelson.
and the same on Instagram.
And we think it's the same on Instagram. We should know. So the first question I got, I'm just going to read these in order. What is the district doing to help homeless in need of meds and shelter who should not be wandering our streets with obvious needs and alarming behavior? I think the basis of the question is that we're not doing enough. There are still a lot of folks who are homeless, who are out on the street, and some do exhibit alarming behavior. But the district does have a pretty robust shelter program, and there's low barrier shelters. We also have street outreach. The city contracts with several nonprofits to do outreach, as well as to feed and provide assistance. So there's quite a bit that's being done to provide meds and shelter. One of the challenges is that those who are mentally ill may not want to take their meds, and there are a number of homeless folks who don't want to go into shelters. The underlying basis for homelessness is a lack of housing. We do have a housing shortage in the city. Fixing that is a long-term challenge, but the city has over the years built or helped to facilitate building tens of thousands of units, affordable units at different levels of affordability. The next question is, my question is about the chairman's position regarding the DC to New York City maglev line. In my view, it represents an opportunity like no other to restructure passenger travel in the Northeast Corridor and beyond. To what degree is the city involved in planning and advocating for this project? The city has not taken a role in advocating for the project at this point. I do know that there is work being done by entities that are interested in developing a maglev line. There is a fundamental challenge, and that is a right-of-way. The maglev is a very high-speed train, and it needs to have an unimpeded right-of-way. And getting that along the entirety of the eastern seaboard or between DC and New York City is a challenge. From time to time, I do hear presentations about it. If the city government is doing anything, it would be through the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, otherwise known as DEMPED. Next question, what is being done around Union Station with its continued obvious deterioration? I'm not quite sure what is being meant there. I was just over by Union Station yesterday. The front of the station, all of that public space is a part of the federal government. I believe it's Park Service, and it's up to them. I don't know that it looks any better or worse than it has for years. That's not to say that it couldn't look a lot more robust in terms of its plants. If the question is about Union Station itself, there is planning underway to revitalize the retail in the station and the passenger experience in the station. There's also long-term development plans behind the station. The National Capital Planning Commission, on which I have a representative, just got a presentation on the latest steps. The Federal Railroad FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, is taking the lead with regard to redevelopment of the station. Redevelopment might be the wrong word, revitalization. The long-term plan is going to cost, I believe, hundreds of millions of dollars, bring additional tracks in, rebuild the H Street Bridge, which will allow for additional tracks, to move the parking underground, have several levels underground, including passenger loading and unloading. The ultimate goal is that the Union Station will be much better structured to serve passengers. The passengers will be able to get in and out of the station more easily, more quickly, not necessarily going to the front of the station to get out, and that the station will be much more alive in terms of multimodal options, revamped bus bays, taxis, ride hailing, so forth. They're rather extensive plans. The questioner might be able to get more information by going to the National Capital Planning Commission website, or it's possible that Union Station Redevelopment Corporation, USRC, has a website and they may have plans. The next question, Council Chairman, what is the status of the Connecticut Avenue bike lane proposal? And will the views of residents and businesses on Connecticut Avenue be taken into account who are largely in opposition? Will other ideas like moving bike lanes to the middle of the road or quiet side streets be considered that are the least disruptive to children, seniors, and disabled residents, as well as businesses who need access to the curb? I'm not quite sure how to answer that. To the extent that council action may be required, key to that will be the Ward 3 council member. Council members tend to defer to a ward member on issues like this. In terms of what the Department of Transportation is going to do, I think DDOT was moving much more quickly and has slowed down. And therefore an opportunity for more input. I am aware that there are quite a number of folks who are opposed, that this could have serious impacts on businesses. And there are concerns about pedestrian safety, particularly with crossing the street, the avenue. All that needs to be looked at. I will say, though, that there's quite a bit of support for the bike lanes, and I'm not suggesting who has more in opposition or more in support, but it's not like there are just opponents and nobody else. So it's going to take some time to work through this, and I would urge that anyone who has a strong view on this should reach out to the ward council member. Next question, can you or your staff work on trash, weed, graffiti cleanup on 395 and 295? It is not a great first impression of our city, the capital of our United States, for people arriving from the airport when there is trash, weeds, tree trimming, graffiti, and probably hasn't been cleaned up in years. I've reported to 311 several times, but nothing seems to be done. I have to agree with the person who wrote the question. And I share the frustration that one contacts DPW or DDOT and nothing seems to be done. I came in yesterday from on US 50, took 295, and I was shocked to drive by the remnants and wreckage of what looked like a VW minibus that had been set on fire. It was quite an unattractive entree into the city. I will reach out to DPW and it would be nice if the city was more aggressive in cleaning up these roads. I'll push for that. Next question, what is the status of the jail coming to 501 New York Avenue and what needs to happen to oppose it? Am I supporting this? I'm unaware of a specific proposal that has matured to the point that there's public discussion of it. There does need to be a new jail. And in fact, my impression is that the front runner location is the existing site of the jail. There's several questions concerning education. OSSI continues to fail to deliver transportation services for special needs students. What is the chair's plan to hold the leadership accountable, as they have had years to turn this around? They have hired new leaders that have demonstrated no impact. Answer, I don't quite share the pessimism there. I know that there were a lot of problems this year, beginning in January. I don't want to say that the services have been great all along, but they got really bad back in January when there was a lot of absenteeism, and there were some changes that have been made. OSSI has improved since January considerably. And so based on that improvement, I don't know that I would say that I agree continues to fail to deliver as if it's made no improvements. With regard to holding the leadership accountable, I do discuss this with the superintendent monthly. And if there doesn't appear to be progress, then more progress, then I'll look to other strategies to hold the leadership accountable. They just brought a new OSSI DOT transportation director. So I don't agree that they've hired new leaders who have demonstrated no impact. They've only been there for a few months. So we have the start of the school year in August, and if the problems reemerge or are substantial, then I definitely will take steps to hold the leadership accountable. Next question, will you commit to requesting that OSSI publish an assessment of the cost to incorporate experience into the funding formula before January 2024, so that the mayor and the DC Council can prepare to include these funds in the FY 2025 budget? We had a hearing, I had a hearing a month ago on the pay for early childhood educators. That's what we're talking about here, even though that wasn't stated explicitly in the question. The early childhood educators, we're talking about like the child care centers. And the council took steps to substantially increase the pay so that it was closer to or somewhat equivalent to the pay that similar teachers or educators in DCPS get. But it came out at the hearing that DCPS, after we increased the pay substantially, that DCPS with the new contract went even higher, and that wasn't met. And so experience is not factored in, and there are good reasons to factor experience in. The cost is roughly $25 million. I believe OSSI actually has costed it. And so when we get into the start of the year, we will look to see what the mayor and OSSI are doing in that regard. The next question, the district has a mosaic of summer and after school programs, but we have much more information about some types of programs than others. What data does the DC Public Charter School Board collect? What is the Charter School Board strategy for connecting students with high quality, affordable, and accessible out of school time programs? The role of the Public Charter School Board is actually fairly limited. The PCSB, the Public Charter School Board, isn't the one that really connects parents and students with out of school time programs. That would be done on a school basis. And generally that's where the information is. The deputy mayor for education is the agency leader on the executive side who's most involved with the out of school time programming. Next question, numerous witnesses brought up OSSI's failure to provide adequate communications or services in Spanish or Amharic. Will the chairman commit to oversight to ensure that OSSI comes into compliance with the DC Language Access Act? So I've heard this question raised by one or two people. I don't know that I would say numerous witnesses, but it is an oversight issue that I will press OSSI on. The next couple of questions deal with crime. Is the council considering any legislation to stop the use of fake temporary tags? I firmly believe crime would drop if there was actual enforcement of the tags. I appreciate the question, and I mean no criticism of it, but this is the kind of question that just really frustrates me. The council doesn't do enforcement. It's the police that do enforcement. It's the U.S. attorney, the prosecutors who do enforcement. The fake temporary tags are illegal, so there's already legislation that the council has adopted. And so the issue now is to ensure compliance, and that is totally an executive function. Now, if the chief of police comes to the council and says, I need a change in the law because there's this particular provision and it's an obstacle to our enforcement, then absolutely we should consider that and move on that. But that has not happened. So I get it that the questioner says, what is the council doing here? We've already made it against the law to use fake temporary tags. Now it's up to the executive to enforce the law. And that's on the mayor or the police. I don't know what, if anything, the police needs to do to improve their enforcement capabilities. And I say that because I don't chair a public safety committee, and the public safety committee would be the closest to this, or the transportation committee because it oversees DDOT. Next question. I was a little confused by your statement last week being upset about the blame put on the council for the rise in violent crime. My statement last week being upset about the blame put on the council for rise in violent crime. In June 2020, Judiciary Chairman Charles Allen publicly said, quote, this was the biggest reduction to MPD funding, unquote, he has, quote, ever seen, unquote. He then said, quote, the funding cuts would be, quote, this is, I guess, a quote within a quote, an effective hiring freeze, unquote, for MPD, and that the strategy was to, quote, reduce the force size, unquote. Doesn't the council deserve some blame for the policies enacted in the summer of 2020? All right, my statement last week, I made a statement at the council meeting after the council had nearly finished its work on the public safety legislation. I say nearly finished. All the amendments have been considered, and all the members had spoken. I was the last to speak, and my comments were intended to protect the council from criticism that the mayor was leveling, that somehow this was a council issue and not an executive issue. And I want to be clear about this. Where we can make adjustments to the law, the council absolutely should consider that. But crime is a function of a number of factors, some of which has to do with whether the police are catching crooks and making arrests, some of which has to do with whether the prosecutor is prosecuting. So I was trying to emphasize that rather than the mayor pointing fingers at the council, that there are things that the mayor can be doing that would make a much more immediate and substantial difference. We passed a bill last week, and that bill does make a few changes, but how quickly they have an effect is not clear. Maybe one of the changes that would make the biggest difference would be a change in the pretrial detention statute to make it easier for the courts to hold somebody in jail pending trial. But this kind of comes back to what I said. The courts aren't going to hold anybody in jail pending trial if the police don't arrest. And why do I put it that way? I'm not criticizing the police, but the fact is that closure rates are low. They're low across the country, but they could be higher. So of homicides in the district, the homicides closed within 12 months is 47%, less than half are closed within 12 months. I had earlier cited a lower statistic, which was how many homicides occurred in 2022 that were closed in 22, and that number was something like 35%. The council legislation doesn't affect that, and even changes to pretrial detention doesn't affect that. And then there's the issue of prosecutions. A lot of crime is committed by repeat offenders. And if the U.S. attorney doesn't prosecute aggressively and get a conviction, a felony conviction for violent crime, then that does affect the deterrent value. In fact, it reduces the deterrent value. So that's what I was getting at. Yes, the council did reduce by, I think it was 3%. I think it was a $15 million cut to a $500 million budget. It's actually more than 500 million in the summer of 2020. And what was surprising to me then was that this was 2 months after George Floyd's murder, and folks may not remember, but there was a lot of talk about defunding the police, cutting their budget in half, not cutting it by, help me here, by 3%. Yes, we, in hindsight, I think there were, that was not great for the department. However, I don't know that there was a better option for the council at that time, given public sentiment and what was being said about defunding the police. Since 2020, that is in the 3 budgets adopted since then, we have funded, fully funded hiring. And the challenge is that DC, like cities across the country, are struggling to find recruits, qualified recruits for the police force. The people are not applying, and this is a problem in cities across the country. And folks can say, yeah, well, that's because our laws are so onerous, but this is a problem in other cities where the laws are different. And people can say, well, it's because DC is unattractive to cops, except that police forces around the country are unattractive to applicants. So what we did 3 years ago is not the problem today. We have funded hiring substantially more officers than we have. I do want to talk to the chief about whether there are strategies that we can get personnel in place who maybe are not sworn police officers to handle some business that doesn't require a sworn officer, and in that way get more resources to the police department. So the next question is kind of a variation on what I just answered. What is the council doing about crime? Do you believe that we're in a state of emergency with violent crimes and unsolved cases? Well, state of emergency has different meanings to different people. When I said to the House Republicans at a hearing in March that there's not a crime crisis, it was because to them, crime crisis meant justification for Congress to take over the district. And so I did not agree with them, but I'm very concerned about the amount of violent crime in the city. Let me be clear. I feel safe wherever I go in the city, and I go around the city quite a bit because I'm elected citywide. But I get it that a lot of people are frightened, and the government has got to do more to deal with this. And I think there's some strategies that actually would reduce crime. I touched on that already, and I don't think they're being followed. And that's very concerning to me. Next question, what is the district doing about the uptick in crime in the area around G and H Streets Northeast? Also, is the district doing anything to tax these establishments to ensure they keep our streets and sidewalks clean? So here again, I'm frustrated with the mayor. I think she needs to deploy more officers downtown or look for other strategies that make people feel safer in the area around G and H Streets. I'm assuming you're talking about around the Capitol Arena. I have actually talked to the mayor about this in the past, and I feel like it's just not a priority to the administration, and I disagree. And the council cannot make the mayor deploy officers in a particular place. We can ask for it, we can demand it, but this is on her. With regard to taxing the establishments, I believe that area is in the downtown bid, and therefore they already are taxed additional to other businesses to help with street and sidewalk cleanliness. Next question, what is the district doing to curtail activities at these various pot shops that skirt current regulations governing distribution of edibles and other paraphernalia? I'm seeing a lot of cars with parking permits outside of DC, occupying residential parking, waiting to buy products from the so-called dispensaries. I have pushed hard and been unsuccessful in getting as much as I wanted from the council in terms of legislation that would make it more difficult for these pop-ups and this so-called dispensaries to operate. We are moving slowly in the direction of making it more difficult for these pot shops to operate. But this doesn't rest solely with the council. Last summer, the mayor announced an initiative to shut down the illegal pot shops, and then suddenly disbanded that initiative. I don't know why. I am told that when the police have made arrests and brought them to the U.S. attorney, the U.S. attorney declines to prosecute the cases. I have spoken with a number of members of Congress about removing the rider that prohibits us from regulating recreational marijuana. If we could regulate recreational marijuana, we would change the economics and make it more difficult for these pot shops to succeed. And it also, because there would be legal shops, I think would change the dynamic and make it more popular for enforcement against the illegal shops. But I can assure you that, as I am saying here in this meetup, illegal establishments, that I will get some feedback about how they're not illegal, or why am I putting district residents out of business. I hope you're hearing that I'm not feeling sympathetic there, but this has been a challenge because of the congressional rider. So before I turn to Lindsay, I kind of hate the way I answer these questions regarding crime, because I don't think I really articulate what I'm trying to say very well. Enforcement is a police function and a U.S. attorney function. It's not a council function. Where the council plays an important role is whether the law is clear and whether the law is written in such a way that the police and the U.S. attorney has the tools they need. It's easy to point a finger at the legislature and say, we need to change the law, like we need to make sentences longer. But the research is clear that that is not what actually reduces crime or has an immediate effect. What I think will have a more immediate effect, or an immediate effect, is if we work with the police to identify what additional resources they need to be able to close more cases and to close them quickly. And then primarily for the mayor, because she's the chief executive, to work quietly with U.S. attorney to increase the prosecution rate. If people aren't getting arrested, it's kind of hard to fight crime. And if people aren't getting prosecuted, I can assure you, it's hard to keep bad guys off the street. And that's where the priorities need to be. Lindsay.
All right, we have quite a few questions on Facebook and YouTube. Start with a couple of DCHA questions. How has the DCHA response to the HUD audit, which was due at the end of May, been shared with you or other council members? And will you ask DCHA to make it public?
The question was about the Housing Authority's response to the HUD audit last October. Should it be public? Yes, it should be public. Has it been shared with the council? I would have to ask Councilmember Robert White, who chairs the Housing Committee. I've not seen it, but I don't have direct responsibility or oversight over the Housing Authority. Ask me about education. I have direct oversight there. So it should be public, and I don't know if it's been shared.
Another DCHA follow-up. How will you work with Councilmember White on oversight of funds to ensure there's never a repeat of the years of HUD violations by DC? Would you agree that more hearings are necessary to get this right?
Would I agree that more hearings are necessary? Well, implicit is that Councilmember White isn't having enough hearings. I do think hearings are important, and I do talk to or meet with Robert from time to time to discuss his thinking and where we could be most effective with regard to oversight of the Housing Authority. The Housing Authority plays an important role with affordable housing in the city, and as of last fall, roughly a quarter of its units were offline, which is just a huge dent in our affordable housing supply. So I've been a supporter of getting money to the Housing Authority for rehabilitating its units, but at the same time been a critic that the Housing Authority has done a very poor job of actually following through. And I'm hopeful that Councilmember Robert White is putting new energy and some focus in through oversight, getting the Housing Authority to be much better and more responsive. The other thing I would note is they're supposed to get a new executive director. I don't know where that search is, but we made a change in terms of dedicated revenue in the out years of the financial plan to try to make the position more attractive to a top quality candidate. Lindsay?
What is the status of Park Morton Bruce Monroe project? We must move from warehousing before to multi-income housing, which takes a couple of generations to succeed.
The status of the Park Morton, what do I want to call that, redevelopment? I don't like that term because it suggests that the residents will not have first option to come back, and they need to have that, and that is our policy. I'm not on top of what's going on with that project. My recollection is that the new housing, which is key to this at the old Bruce Monroe site, has been hung up, hasn't been completed, and that has delayed things. Councilmember Nadeau has been following this much more closely than I, and when she has seen legislative steps that would help, she's come to the council, and I've been supportive. Lindsay?
Who is responsible for launching a legal investigation of violation of election fraud within the ANC? The questioner alleges that a couple of commissioners do not within the ANC in which they represent.
Allegations of the way the question was phrased was election fraud, but it actually is, I just heard, some ANC commissioners who don't live in the single member district to which they were elected. My personal view is that the Board of Elections should enforce that. The Board of Elections maintains the voter rolls. The Board of Elections is the place to go when people get elected and when people resign and when there's a special election. So my view is that the Board of Elections is the one that should investigate. In the past, I think the board has deflected, which I disagree with. And so I would suggest that the questioner go to Councilmember Anita Bonds and press her to press the board or to consider a hearing. That may be a bit much for an issue involving just a single member district, but Councilmember Bonds might be able to help. So again, my view is the Board of Elections should investigate. And if they're resistant, maybe Councilmember Bonds can help because she has oversight over the board. Lindsay?
Couple of questions about the announcement today from the mayor. Today, the mayor announced Ken Smith as the new MPD chief. Technically, the chief is internal and somewhat new. What are your thoughts on the process? And also, how soon would the council be able to approve the nomination?
The mayor announced the nomination of Pam Smith to be the new chief of police. However, she's not sent the legislation to the council. If she had made this decision last week, then the legislation would be here and we could act on it first thing in September. She will have to wait 2 months to submit the legislation. I'm assuming that Councilmember Pinto will have a hearing. I think the hearing will be very important for two reasons. First, we want to hear from the public and what they think. And there may be some folks who know Chief Smith's experience, skills, qualifications, and can provide some useful insight there. The second reason it would be useful is that we will have had a couple months of experience with Chief Smith and will be in a better position to judge her. I think it's good that the mayor hired from within the department, although Pam Smith has not been in the department a hugely long period of time. I do think it's good that the mayor is nominating from somebody who has extensive senior level experience in police departments. But in the end, I think the most important qualities, which are always hard to gauge, is management skill, a relationship skill, community confidence building. So maybe we'll get some sense of that over the next 2 months. Lindsay?
A follow-up to the Board of Elections question, is there legal recourse that it's a crime if you claim it or you don't? Would the Attorney General be able to investigate the falsification or alleged falsification?
I don't know if it's a crime, but it might be. And the questioner could follow up with the Attorney General's office and say, I think this is criminal, and press the Attorney General to investigate.
In a follow-up to your Aussie comments earlier, questioner appreciates yours and Aussie's informal estimate of 20 to 25 million that Aussie says they need to factor experience into early educators' pay. They have not put that in writing for advocates. Could you request that they do that?
I don't know if folks could hear the question, but it was a follow-up on the issue of early educator pay and factoring in experience, which I said earlier at a hearing that my committee had. Aussie estimated that was something like $20–25 million. We will be looking at that more closely in the fall.
How will you ensure DCPS complies with the budget law, the schools first law?
The question was, how will I ensure that DCPS complies with the schools first in budgeting law? The council moved about $27 million into individual schools, recognizing schools that have a significant at-risk population should get additional resources, and also stabilizing budgets, that is, eliminating schools from facing budget cuts for next year. I don't understand how we approve the quality. I don't understand how we improve the quality of education in a school that has a high percentage of at-risk students, most of whom are testing at below basic, if we are reducing funding in that school. And what I saw with the budget that was submitted to the council was school after school. In fact, it was 80 schools that were getting cuts, and some of them are significant. I believe, just as one example, Anacostia High School, the restoration and funding that we did, plus the additional funding for at-risk students, that they're getting about $750,000 more. And I don't know how Anacostia is expected to provide improved education and improved educational outcomes if it has to get by with $750,000 less than it should have, and budget cuts compared to last school year. I'm considering having a hearing during the summer to press DCPS. We sent a letter out. I sent a letter to each school principal telling them what their budget would be for next year, in the hopes that that will keep the pressure on the chancellor to follow through with the appropriation as we adopted it. So through oversight, strategies like communicating the increase to principals, I'm hopeful that we will see compliance with this additional funding for individual schools. DCPS has pushed back. They don't like the fact that Central was reduced. The budget that the council adopted was a budget that included something like 86 vacant positions at Central. That's 86 positions they can fill. So when they say that we cut positions in procurement, which is actually not true, or cut positions in human resources, which is actually not true, they have 86 vacancies that they can fill any way they want to. That's just the nature of how we adopt our budget. We don't cut specific positions, and they have authority to use funding as long as it's in the right department any way they want to. And they pushed back and said that we made cuts that will mean that no schools will get new computer devices like laptops, but actually we didn't cut that line at all. And actually the amount of money that's available in what's called non-personal services is slightly higher for this coming school year than it was in the school year we just finished. And actually on top of that, they have, if I remember correctly, over $140 million in ESSER money, that's federal money. And it includes roughly $30 million that we moved from fiscal year 2023 to fiscal year 2024 that was unallocated. And when we moved it to FY24, we left it unallocated. So that money's available for computers or substitute teachers or security or any of the other Washington Monument cuts that DCPS has been loudly talking about. It really, I haven't seen anything quite like this, that there's such a fight for by the chancellor to defund individual schools and to just wage war over what the council did that should have, I mean, it's getting money directly into the classrooms, what we did. Lindsay?
What can we do with restaurants that without a public space permit store trash bins and alleyways outside their property line? They can end up blocking alleys and they also encourage vermin in the alleys.
So there's a question about restaurants storing trash cans. I shouldn't say storing, keeping trash cans and putting trash off their property in alleys and public space. Call up Department of Public Works and have them come out and ticket. I mean, that's really the quickest way to do it. Lindsay?
Is it possible to establish the expectation that legislation not be voted on without a clear statement about how and by whom it is to be enforced? It seems like laws are created and then no one enforces them.
This is what elections are about, and this is why we have in the policy branch, the council elected representatives, and why we have in the executive branch an elected mayor. If the questioner is unhappy about enforcement or implementation, that's on the executive. The laws that we pass are clear who has to enforce. We pass a law saying that shooting a firearm is endangering the public, and the police are the ones who are supposed to enforce that, as well as the U.S. Attorney as a prosecution. We pass a law that says that it's illegal to litter. The Department of Public Works is to enforce that. So this isn't a guessing game, but it's not a guessing game that the council needs to address. It is rather inertia by city agencies. Don't want to defend it. Don't want to sound like this is okay, because I don't think it's okay. I just spoke for a couple of minutes about the budgeting of schools, where we passed a law and the chancellors disregarded that law. I should say the chancellor and the mayor have disregarded the law. And so I'm looking at strategies to ensure compliance with it. And that's what the different council committees have to do. But it's not like the council isn't being clear and therefore the agencies are off the hook. No, the agencies are culpable when they don't enforce the law. Lindsay?
An ANC commissioner was recently sued for misuse of a Twitter account labeled Commissioner, whatever they call it. He proceeded to block constituents' comments, and now the Attorney General is settling at DC government expense. Other than voting, who can regulate this sort of thing? Like misuse of government property, I guess.
Who can regulate? Well, I don't know the nature of the Attorney General's enforcement action, but that's one place. Elections is another place. In the end, improper or illegal conduct is just that, illegal or improper. We already say you can't do it. And so then we have the enforcement mechanisms in place. And I get it that the questioner is frustrated because I believe I know the situation, and this has been going on for a couple of years, and the commissioner has been advised that the commissioner cannot, block people from their public social media accounts. And in the end, it's just up to either enforcement authorities like the Attorney General or the voters through an election. And I get that that's not a happy answer.
What are your top 2 legislative dream items to pass this term? I guess, or the rest of this legislative period.
Well, I don't know if these are bills, but I'm focused on how we continue to get money and resources stability in our schools. So I used all those words, money, stability. We're looking to have a series of hearings this fall with regard to teacher turnover, principal turnover. As I said, we may have a hearing on the funding, whether the schools first in budgeting funding is actually getting to the schools as it's supposed to. So I'm looking at oversight on that, because I think that's what will make the biggest difference in terms of improving education, is getting stability in our schools and more resources in the schools that have seen cuts year after year after year. And similarly with the Department of Buildings, which oversees the vacant property enforcement, um, building code enforcement, which affects tenants, building permit, construction permit enforcement to reduce the amount of illegal construction that's taking place. And we're actually looking at a fairly comprehensive oversight schedule on that to try to improve that. You know, I don't like the way I answer some questions, because I feel like I'm that I'm coming across as passing the buck. I struggle with the agencies that are in the committee of the whole, like Department of Buildings and the school system. We have policies in place. Now, how do we get the agencies to comply? I absolutely think it's our responsibility through oversight to try every strategy we can to get an agency to comply, to improve the outcomes from those agencies, whether we're talking about building code enforcement or an agency that's not under my committee, the police, or the U.S. Attorney, or DCPS. And I think it's on us through oversight to try to improve compliance or enforcement or implementation by the government. And I hope that I hope I'm getting that point across. Lindsay,
Do you have any updates on the O Street wall or construction on O Street?
do I have any updates on the Old Street wall? Not for about a month. I talked to the new Department of Buildings director. I actually got him to go out and look at the site. I think he ran into some neighbors, and I do definitely need to follow up with that. What I want is an independent assessment of the integrity of the wall to make sure that nothing has injured its viability. And then I am frustrated with at least one of the construction sites, which I think has had multiple stop work orders. And why can't the department either shut it down or force the developer to do things the right way? Of course, that sounds like what's been asked of me. What can I do to get the executive to do things the right way? Lindsay?
The police union says that the biggest challenge facing the new chief will be the officer numbers. And the only way to turn around is to have the council rewrite some of the language in the Policing and Justice Reform Act that were passed in June of 2020.
Well, I don't know how much all of you have heard this, but the police union is criticizing the council over the mayor's appointment of the new police chief, and wants the accountability legislation that we adopted to be repealed or largely repealed. I just have a hard time with this notion that we have better policing if we have less accountability. And I have problems with this notion that the reason we don't have more cops is because we want to facilitate the hiring of bad cops or keeping bad cops on the force. Actually, you know, when a police officer is believed to have raped a drunk college student, I don't understand why we are defending that police officer staying on the force. But the FOP has been really upset about what we did to remove the FOP from being able to bargain its disciplinary process, which extensive research has shown across the country that you have worse police accountability when the police bargain their own disciplinary process, because they bargain such a cumbersome disciplinary process that the bad cops almost always succeed. So I don't agree with that. And as I said before, the FOP just pretends this isn't true. Police departments across the country are struggling to hire officers. The last I checked, New York City was down like 6,000 police officers. Now they have a larger department, but they're struggling to hire police officers, and this is true across the country. And it has nothing to do with our local laws. It has everything to do with the nonstop news reports of bad police, which has made the profession look unattractive. And I'm confident that that will change. And as I said, I think we need to look at strategies to attract more recruits, but also strategies that utilize more civilians where we don't need to have a sworn police officer, and in that way get more resources to our police. Sorry, FOP, but these civilians may not be FOP members.
A couple of lighthearted questions that were asked at the beginning, but I'll save it to the end. What is your favorite way to de-stress during council recess, and what does the council do during recess?
You know, I hate these questions. I don't know if you all heard this. What do I do to de-stress? And what does the council do during recess? Well, you know, most legislatures, state legislatures in the country meet for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. And then the rest of the year, they're not meeting. And I think they don't have a whole lot of committee hearings. We don't meet for 2 months in the summer. And actually, if we were to meet in the summer, like we had hearings, just regular business in August, we would hear no end of complaints from folks who say, you know, people are on vacation. This is a horrible time of year to have hearings. So actually what happens is that most of the council staff, most of the council members who have their own personnel authority, most of the committees have a work plan for the summer to do a lot of work so that when we come back in September 19th is our first meeting, that we will have a busy fall adopting legislation or conducting hearings, all of which was planned out, worked on during the recess. Next question.
The new street lights, their LED lights, seem to provide less light across streets. Have you been noticing this problem, or has anyone brought this up to you?
The question is that the new LED lights provide less light across the streets. Have I noticed this? No, I have not. And I'm not quite sure how to respond. We do want to have adequate light on our streets, but we also want to reduce what's called light pollution. We don't need to be lighting up the sky at night, which actually has some adverse consequences in interesting ways. So if the less light is nothing more than less light pollution, that wouldn't be a problem. If it actually is making our streets darker than they should be, then that would be a concern. But no, I have not observed this. This is something, there's somebody who's been reaching out to me about LED lights and streetlight poles, and I've connected them with the Committee on Transportation because they're the ones who are directly involved. Lindsay? We may be near the end of our questions here. I'll struggle for a minute or two.
So if you weren't the chairman, what do you think you'd be doing instead?
If I wasn't the chairman, what would I be doing instead? Let me see. I was an at-large member of the council until I became chairman. And as so I might still be doing that. I enjoy working with many different communities to make up our city. And I see similar but different issues between neighborhoods and wards, like, what am I thinking of here? Yes, I remember when I was first elected, trash in the streets or trashes and trash transfer stations, very different from one ward to the next. I enjoy the similar but different problems, which I see as challenges around the city. And I learned a long time ago that I can help as an advocate for communities. But sometimes the executive branches are just as unresponsive to the council as they are to citizens. And I enjoy the challenge of trying to find different ways to get the agencies to do their jobs better. I think that we can be doing much better as a city. We are a leader in this country in many ways, like green buildings, like early childhood educator pay. But we could be doing even better, and there are many other areas where we are not a leader and we need to be better. I believe that our schools, public school system, public education needs to be judged in terms of how many kids are scoring as or are tested as proficient, as opposed to whether we are improving faster than other jurisdictions. Because if our kids are getting a good education, then they will have a much better opportunity to do whatever they want and to get decent pay and to not worry about the wealth gap when they grow up, if they have a good education. So long-term strategy, it's something I think government should do. I'm finding it interestingly tough, given the pushback I've gotten from DCPS over what we did with their budget. But I think it's the right way to go, and that's what I enjoy doing. So maybe we leave it with that, unless there's one other question that came in. Next month, August, I think we take a break. And in September, we'll be back and maybe in person, and look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you, all of you who participated, and thank you for your questions. And sorry that this feels more like a monologue to me, but I'm hopeful that it was responsive. You all have a safe summer and be cool, and see you in